Welcome back to book reviews, yoga book reviews by a yoga teacher. Today I'm actually really excited to share about a book that I don't have to show you. So the thumbnail was a different book by the same person, just to show his face, that's why I covered it, the title. But Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramhansa Yogananda. This is a really famous yoga person. This is a really famous book. Again, not the one I'm holding up, but Autobiography of a Yogi. You've probably seen it if you're in the yoga world at all. It's an orange book. It has a picture of Yogananda on the cover, similar to this one. Okay, look, I didn't actually finish reading this book. I felt it was a total waste of time to read. I got to page 85 over the course of 2 years of trying to read the book, of coming back to it, treating it almost like self-assigned homework, thinking I really had to read it because everyone who does yoga supposedly has read this book. It's a bestseller, it sold so many copies, etc. I want to read you some of my review that I wrote at the time that I stopped reading it 2 years ago. So I started trying to read it in 2016, and I eventually quit in 2018, and here's something that I wrote. Even if you read this with the attitude that it is fiction, which it's not supposed to be, it's the autobiography, it's supposed to be nonfiction. Even if you read this with the attitude that it is fiction with something worthwhile to say, it's still boring and confusing and braggy. I should have stopped reading on page 1 when the author tells the reader he remembers past lives and being a baby, at which time all languages were swirling around in his mind, but then he settled on the one that he heard spoken around him. It just gets more fanciful after that. I'm not sure why I didn't expect this. It's by a religious leader and he talks about love of God a ton. As an atheist, I wouldn't want to read a book about God by anyone, really. I guess I thought I was supposed to read this because I practice and teach yoga. Well, there were only 1 or 2 interesting or relevant or sane lines about anything to do with yoga in the 85 pages that I read. Someone please explain to me why this book is one of the best or a classic. It reads like the rantings of a narcissist. Harsh, I know, but I stand by this, and I think he was actually just a narcissistic cult leader, and at least for someone else who's maybe similar, such as Osho, who comes to mind, when you read some of Osho's writings, they still do contain a kernel of truth or something profound or wise or useful or interesting, whereas, like I said, Autobiography of a Yogi is just the ravings of a person who's obviously lying unless you believe in magic and believe in God granting supernatural powers. And I just don't believe it. And like I said, even if you read it as fiction, it's still just really boring and hard to follow and not interesting and I just don't get it. I don't get why people like this book. Another fact that might be interesting to you if you're trying to decide whether or not to read this book is the fact that Paramhansa Yogananda was born in the late 1800s, and the book was first published in 1946. So it also reads like an old book from that time. But like I said, it reads like science fiction, but not in an interesting way. So please leave me a comment if you have already read this book and what you thought about it. I would really, really like to know. I'm looking at the book right now on Goodreads. I gave it a 1-star rating, which is, I did not like it, out of 5 stars on Goodreads. But almost 45,000 people have rated this book on Goodreads, and the aggregate rating, the average, is 4.23 stars out of 5. I just don't understand. I don't understand it at all. Even if you think about like reading this for a historical perspective, because it was one way that sparked the Eastern religious craze, in the US in the 20th century, I just don't see enough benefit of reading the text directly to make it worth it. It's so boring. It's pretty long. It's almost 400 pages. And it's not like bad enough to be actually interesting that it's so bad. Like when a movie is so bad that it's actually funny. It's just really bad, but not bad enough to be interesting. Let me also just give a disclaimer that there are followers of this yogi who believe him, and I'm not sure if you would consider that a religious thing because he's talking about God. I'm not trying to insult anyone's religion. Like I said before, this is a way that I would feel about this no matter who was writing. To give you some context as a follow-up to that statement of why I definitely am not interested in this book and wouldn't recommend anyone read it, on ananda.org, which is an organization, I think a nonprofit since it's .org, devoted to this man and his teachings. There's a quote on their website, I'll read it to you, on the page for this book. And it says, quote, "Imagine Christ, Buddha, or Krishna telling their life story in their own words. That's what you get when you read Yogananda's Autobiography of a Yogi." You might interpret that really differently than I've interpreted that statement. If that's something that appeals to you, go ahead and read this book. If that's something that makes you roll your eyes like it does to me, definitely don't read it. It's not worth it. Also, if you're going to buy it, it's free online. So just look for it online for free. Anyways, thanks so much for listening to my mini rant about this. I just don't understand why it's such a classic, why people love it. Again, comment below with your opinion on it. And thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't yet, and more yoga book reviews by a yoga teacher coming soon.